Whenever someone begins to talk about war movies, what do you tend to think about? Does your mind wander to the endless award-winning war films that everyone has seen at least once? Or do you think about less popular war films that are sometimes foreign and have a different opinion on the war? Whatever category of war film you thought of, did you think about how accurate those popular war films that everyone loves are? It is a widely discussed topic, however, if it is directed well enough, it is very difficult to take into account when watching. While most war films do include historically accurate information, most falsify or dramatize certain events, which greatly affects the accuracy of said film. It is often found that foreign films have a very different outlook on wars, which is logical because different countries view the war based on their country's involvement, but could also sway the thoughts and beliefs of the viewer. In today's world, people's beliefs are influenced by the media in its portrayal of events, and World War II is a prime example to this idea. The depiction of war differs greatly between people who have experienced it firsthand versus people who see it through the lens of media. While watching war films can be informative about the broad events in the war, they do not give the full details and experiences of the veterans and people involved. A good way to enlarge one's understanding of the war is to speak and listen to veterans, just like in the Wisdom Project podcast where Doug Boyd explains and includes interviews from World War II veterans. The first image, raising the flag on Iwo Jima, is a powerful photograph that shows an intense patriotic moment after the turning point in the Battle of Iwo Jima, fought between the United States Marine Corps and the Imperial Japanese Army during World War II. Joe Rosenthal, an Associated Press photographer, was one of the many cameramen on the island on February 23, 1945. After hearing that Marines were heading up the mountain, he decided that it would be worth it to head up to see what was happening. He went up and found a second flag being raised by 5 U.S. Marines and a Navy sailor. It could be said that this photo was so powerful that it impacted Americans in many different ways and could have even helped win the war. This photo symbolized many things for Americans during World War II. By giving hope, it raised spirits about what the outcome of the war would be. It had a powerful impact when it was first released and influenced people's beliefs about the war, and even though it is roughly 70 years later, it is still impacting citizens today. This image is so inspiring because it shows America what all countries want: victory. With media such as movies and images so prominent in everyday culture, it is hard not to believe what is being portrayed. Even though this is an accurate image from World War II, it is easy to misinterpret what is being portrayed. The media is a powerful tool used to impact people's beliefs and thoughts about the war, but it can be dangerous if used incorrectly or without any background knowledge. Although this is a very simple and popular image, most Americans would not be able to identify which war this was, when this photo was taken, or who these Marines just defeated. It could easily be misinterpreted for another war or could be even taken the wrong way.
One of the problems is that most war films contain a strong bias towards the country they are produced in. In the book titled Visions of War, written by Catherine Kane, the ideas of the war in the media and the truth of the media is explained. Quote, America's allies are domestic, tolerant, honorable, emotional, religious, and respectful. End quote. While the, quote, Germans and Japanese are totalitarian, oppressive, dispassionate, ruthless, imperialistic, fanatical, and atheist. End quote. Quoted in Kane, page 14, Kentucky. We chose to interview him because he relies off a common knowledge to describe what World War II means to him.
What would you say is missing from war movies that is included in World War II?
Well, for American war movies, I believe a lot of things missing is like the German perspective. Like, they weren't all cold-blooded killers. So yeah, American war films really do lack like both sides of the story.
How much knowledge would you say you've gained from watching World War II movies?
Well, actually, I have a funny story about this. When I was a little kid, and like my my mom's father was a dean of history at a university. Also, like he tried to encourage my parents to show me war films to like get me interested in history. Although I think the one war movie I remember like the earliest was Pearl Harbor by Michael Bay. Yes, Michael Bay. That was my first like real World War II movie. I remember. Yeah, it's Michael Bay. It wasn't historical. It was big. It's a horrible movie. And I remember the day after I watched that, we went to this market and I had the Japanese stand out. I was probably maybe 4 feet tall, 5 or 6. Went straight up to the guy. He's like, haha, we beat your ass in World War II. And he's like, what? And my mom had to come over, grab me, and apologize to the guy. Pick your movies carefully to your kids. Try to go for as most accurate as you can. Do some research before you watch a World War II movie, because there's some out there that are completely falsified for romanticism, action. Saving Private Ryan was actually it's probably one of the best World War II films, because they focused on not really making Americans heroes. They show monstrosities from both sides of the war sides. So yeah, I think that would be a good movie if you're too lazy to actually go talk to a veteran or read a book.
History is fragile. War movies are the easiest way into influencing one's belief of what actually happened. When Hunter viewed one as a child, he saw Japan and its people as director Michael Bay portrayed them. Movies will work, but not completely. Do your research before watching, because most focus on America as the hero and doesn't portray both sides' monstrosities.
This next image is a screenshot from the movie Saving Private Ryan. It's captured from the beginning scene in the movie, and Saving Private Ryan is an award-winning war film that is focused on World War II. This image is portraying the main battle scene in the D-Day invasion of Normandy. Although graphic, this image is showing the soldiers fighting for their lives just moments after they had arrived on the beach. After months of strategic planning and different waves of attack, the day finally came and the Allies were victorious. This victory was such a great one that it became the turning point for the war in Europe. The director behind Saving Private Ryan and the mastermind behind this image is Steven Spielberg, and this movie was released in late 1998. This movie is known for its amount of detail that was put into every scene and just how realistic each scene looks. Saving Private Ryan is known by countless people, and for many it is their image and view of World War II and the Battle of Normandy. While many people have never spoken to a World War II veteran or researched their thoughts, they think that they know what occurred in the war and how these veterans feel. What people don't take the time to do is think about the fact that this story they are watching is in the form of a movie. Hollywood's main concern was not making every aspect of this movie factual. They wanted a movie that would make them money. These dramatic stories have a tendency to overshadow the true importance of the war. It is important to know how the veterans feel, how the Americans feel, and to hear personal stories that actually happened and how they were affected by them.
Even though war films have a strong bias towards the country they're produced in, they also spend little or no time confronting, quote, moral, political, or ideological conflicts of the war, end quote. Quoted in Kane, page 13.
Crocker. We chose to interview Dr. Crocker because she specializes in teaching World War I and World War II, and we knew she would have more insight on the subject.
What do you think is missing in war films that you can pick up in the other things you said?
Complexity.
Okay.
If you try and compress even a single event, such as the D-Day invasion, into a 2-hour film, you're going to lose a lot of complexity. And that is nuance. That kind of nuance is what gets lost in war movies. Just about every movie has inaccuracies. I was watching, my husband and I were watching Das Boot. Have you guys seen that?
I have not.
Okay, it's actually a German film. It's not a film. It's like a mini series. So if you put it all together, it's about 6 hours long. But there's a 3-hour version that they've put together with subtitles or dubbed or whatever, and they take great pains in the movie to make it clear that the submariners aren't Nazis. Okay. They're good German soldiers, but they're not Nazis, and that's so that you can sympathize with them and you can enjoy watching them. A movie that had a start, a finish, a glorious battle at the end where they defeat a bunch of Nazis, and it was all very unrealistic. But the point is that you couldn't make the realistic film. Mm-hmm. So whenever you start talking about realism in the movies, you start coming against the fact that if you make it too real, nobody wants to see it.
An article titled "The Failure of Allied Planning and Doctrine for Operation Overlord," written by Adrian Lewis, explains the details and logistics of the attack on France. Many people believe that the invasion of Normandy was a quick and easy success for the Allies. However, there were lots of obstacles to overcome, and the invasion was a, quote, sequence of events, end quote, Lewis, meaning that if one mission failed, the following one would most likely fail as well. It is hard for an audience to understand the complexity of these stories and battles through film. The final image, the VJ Day kiss, also known as the Victory over Japan Day kiss, is a famous picture of a World War II sailor kissing a nurse after hearing the news about the war ending. This picture was taken by Alfred Eisentate on VJ Day, which was August 14, 1945. In an article by Mahida Ganjanan, the story behind the iconic World War II kissing photo, she mentions, quote, the picture captured the jubilance people felt upon the war's end, end quote, Ganjanan. Although both strangers, the excitement at the moment caused the sailor to kiss the random nurse. This photo shows how the war can be used as a background for stories and can easily be romanticized. Whenever war films become romanticized, the war story trying to be conveyed is covered up by the false love story. When this happens, which it does fairly often, the accuracy of the film immediately starts to decrease and events start getting falsified. War movies tend to skip important topics for one reason, so they can make more money. Because of this, the main goal of producers is to do what it takes to get people to watch them. So, they skip important information that would otherwise bore the audience. Quote, a key factor to obtaining this goal is to have the movie relate in some way to almost everyone who watches it. End quote. The audience has to be considered. Most of the movie watchers are not highly educated on details of war, so the films must be produced in a way that most people can understand to get people to watch them. Just like the professor mentioned, war movies condense the story to make them around 2 hours, because few people want to view a movie that is long enough to include all of the details from the war that is being portrayed. Most people want to see victory in action, so it is added to movies in ways that is often not factual.
When you're showing a war movie or you're making a war movie, you always have to consider your audience. Therefore, they usually like to see a victory. They usually like to see characters they can relate to. It was a big convention, for example, in the 60s and 70s to make the films where everybody in the unit, one guy was from a big city and one guy was from a small farm and one guy was from a small town and one guy was a factory worker, just so that everybody in the audience would have somebody on the screen they could say, oh, that person's like me. Mm-hmm. So what a film does is iron out a lot of the nuance, takes out a lot of the complications, makes things simpler for the audience, and usually gives them people they can cheer for. Another thing that I think war films do is they reflect our ideas about ourselves. You know, America likes to view its history in a very uncomplicated way, and therefore we want it to be John Wayne, you know, raising the flag at Iwo Jima, or Brad Pitt in his tank in Fury, going out there and whipping the hell out of the Germans.
Since the main goal of most directors is to get people to watch their movies, World War II movies haven't always been based off accuracy, rather the involving political and social norms. So one of the best ways to get a more complex understanding of World War II is by listening to veterans.
World War II is seen by many Americans as, quote, the good war, end quote. Quoted in Thomas A. Bacino, page 1. Americans are only defending themselves and their honor. The soldiers, quote, just wanted to finish the job and come home, end quote. Thomas A. Bacino, page 2. World War II is seen by many Americans as, quote, the good war, end quote. Quoted in Thomas A. Bacino, page 1. Americans are only defending themselves and their honor. The soldiers, quote, just wanted to finish the job and come home, end quote. Thomas A. Bacino, page 2. During and shortly after World War II, the image of the war was soldiers fighting for the chance to come home. After World War II, veterans came home and lived their lives as normally as possible while taking advantage of the benefits they received. They didn't speak out about their experiences of the war. If they did, it was whenever they were telling their families. Quote, they did not tell war stories in public venues and produced few memoirs or oral histories in the first few decades after the war, end quote. Thomas A. Bacino, page 3. The very reason soldiers fought in World War II was so that their sons wouldn't have to. During Vietnam, their sons were being shipped off. This made many World War II vets ask themselves why they fought in the first place. Quote, historians Archivists, librarians, museum curators, journalists, and history buffs started collecting questionnaires, interviews, and oral histories from thousands of World War II veterans, all to better understand the war they had fought. End quote. Thomas A. Perchino, page 4. World War II veterans started to describe the war as a much more personal experience that defies the previous belief that World War II vets were fighting for a greater cause. Quote, the popular image of World War II American soldier was not exactly wrong, merely incomplete. End quote. Thomas A. Perchino, page 4. For many years, the film industry tried to depict what World War II was like without the full story of veterans. This is why we need to do more than watch films to gain a better understanding of World War II. In conclusion, war films carry many inaccuracies that create a simplistic view of the war pictured in the minds of the people who view it. They can be a good way to learn about the broad ideas in a war or battle, but they do not give the complexity or accuracy that goes along with being involved in a real war. Speaking with and listening to veterans is a great way to gain knowledge of the complexity, details, and emotions of war.